like the genuinely that like masculine feminine dynamic. I'm like so in it. I'm like all of it, just all all of the above.
Hmm.
Really enjoy enjoy the experience of both of those energies like a lot. So
Oh, great.
anyway,
Yeah.
I don't even know why I told you.
Because I asked. Uh-oh. Oh, okay.
Okay, welcome everybody back to the internet. It's time for some astro schooling. And JP, your last class, people loved it.
Oh, for real? That's great.
Yes. So thank you for coming back with us. And this time we're going to talk about making this approach to the chart, because now we've got planets, houses, signs under our belt. So how do we start to tell that story? And JP is going to walk us through that. So I'm really grateful to have you here. And I'm going to turn it over to you. It's all you.
Great. Thanks for inviting me back. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here and then hit play. There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm JP. I am the founder and a teacher at the Portland School of Astrology. I'm not the only teacher, but I am one of the teachers here. And we are an in-person school here in Portland, Oregon. We also have online programming as well. We're the largest in-person school in the country, if not maybe the continent. I don't know what else is out there. Although that's not like a huge win for us because there's not very many schools. Uh-oh, something stopped. Uh-oh. Am I still streaming?
Yep,
Oh, what else
we're
is out
there.
there? Okay, there it goes. Okay, we're back. Hi, I'm JP from the Portland School of Astrology. I just want to say really quickly about the Portland School of Astrology. You're welcome to visit us online at pdxastro.org, or you can follow us on Instagram. Also, Twitter, it's the same, pdxastro for our Instagram and our Twitter. We just got a Twitter the other day. I forgot to pop it on the slide. But we're an in-person school. We also do online education. We have a low residency programming, as well as a first and second year that's here in Portland. We do an annual conference every year. We've got free and low cost programming as well. We've got digital downloads. We have a school store. We have a physical store. We have an online store. We've got a library here at the school. Yeah, so if you're ever in the area, come by and say hi. But my name is JP Hawthorne, and my personal website is cosmophilia.com. I've been studying astrology since 1995 and have been working with clients for the last 10 years. And the school is almost in its ninth school year. In September, we'll begin our ninth school year. So check us out. Love to hear from you. And let's get started. Is there anything else I was supposed to mention about that? I don't think so. Okay, let's go. So we're talking about approaching the chart, and I love to give you just a table of contents so that you understand and know where we're going. I'm a Virgo rising. I appreciate that. So I like to kind of give you the outline and the structure first before we start. So what we're going to talk about first is just about how important it is to familiarize yourself with as many charts as possible. And then we're going to talk about how to begin. And I'm going to give you kind of some information to articulate the container of approaching the chart. So not just here's some tips about approaching the chart, but also really thinking about who you are as an astrologer, because that will be the difference to how you approach a chart. So we're going to talk about how we define ourselves, how we define our boundaries and parameters. What is our gateway? What is that key? What is that first step into the chart? And then we'll talk about approaching the chart more specifically. So preparation, the use of language when we're talking about astrology with our friends, our family, our clients. And then lastly, some tips on delineation, which is how do we synthesize that information? How do we kind of take a lot of different pieces and put them together? And then we'll end on some resources for you. All right, let me take a drink. Okay. So the first thing I want to mention to you is about familiarizing yourself with the chart. As Stormy said, if you've been following along with this academy, you've learned planets, signs, and houses. Congratulations. But now what I really want you to do and really challenge yourself to do is to look at as many charts as you can. This does not mean that you have to read them. This does not mean that you have to deliver information. But one thing I tell my students a lot, there's two ways that I tell them to learn astrology. One is to look at as many charts as possible, and two is just to ask people questions and look at their chart, right? Because people are really happy to talk about themselves and not with the expectation, again, that you're going to give them information. Just ask them questions, right? When we talked about signs a few weeks ago, um, I give you examples, for instance, like, Aries moon, and my student who's an Aries moon is like this, and my friend who's an Aries moon does this, and my friend who's a dog walker is an Aries moon. And I ask her, why do you like dog walking? And she gives me a very Aries moon answer. And that's information for me that I began to build out the astrology knowledge. So do this often. When you're watching Wendy Williams and she's interviewing somebody on the couch, pull up that person's chart and go, oh, the way they're talking, this is like Mercury and Sagittarius. Okay, like let me really study the ways in which they are giving information out, right? So just constantly looking at charts. And here's some suggestions for you that I have on the screen. Your pro astro contacts. So friends, family, lovers, community, the networks that you're a part of, right? Your knitting groups, your prayer circles, your foodie community, whatever it might be. And the keyword here is also pro astro contacts. And I'll get into that just a little bit and just a little bit, but people who are supportive of your astro education, people who are like, yes, please look at my chart, ask me questions. That's what you want, right? And like I said, I'm going to elaborate on that in just a little bit. Celebrities. When I tell people to look at celebrities' charts, I often get a lot of pushback because people, I think, maybe have a limited idea about what celebrity means. It's not just models and actors and singers. It's also, as I wrote here too, scientists, historical figures, cooking show hosts. I even put in here choreographers, because if you know something about dance and you're able to get your hands on famed choreographer Debbie Allen's chart, who I just looked up, she has a double A in astro.com. So that's the best rating for the astro data. If you know something about dance, then study her chart, study the chart of whoever it is that you might have specialized knowledge in, right? Because that's going to give you more information about them. So authors, activists, writers, artists. And one thing I love to do again is to watch interviews of those people, but also read biographies or watch movies or series about that person's life, because you'll get two pieces of information, something about the natally, right? Their natal chart. You'll see their natal chart in action, but then you'll also get information about transits. So if you're watching, the movie about Ma Rainey that just came out, for instance, there'll be events in Ma's life that then you could go back, get the time information, and plug that into Ma Rainey's chart to get a sense of the transits that were happening at the time, and get a sense of how did Ma react to or work the energy of that transit based on the natal chart, right? What was the transit tickling? What was the transit stimulating in the natal chart? Okay, mini readings. All right, let me take a drink. Okay, so mini readings. Mini readings are something that is built into our second year curriculum because I personally feel so strongly about what mini readings gives us. And what is a mini reading? A mini reading can be a lot of different things. The way that we set it up at the school is that students do 3 rounds of mini readings, and they're 20 minutes each. So the first round is with first year students. So first year students come to the school, they get a 20-minute mini reading with the second year. The second session is with the second year students' friends. They invite friends, and so other students are reading for their friends. And then the third round is for the general public. So we open up the school to everybody. This is during International Astrology Day in March. And people in the community, again, non-students, not necessarily friends of the second years, they come and get a mini reading. And all 3 of those are actually very different and build different skill sets, right? To do it with first years who know a little bit of astrology, to do it with friends who are pro astro, and then to do it with the community who are really wild cards. You don't know what you're going to get. But when you do a mini reading, and you might do them at shops, you might do them at a coffee shop, at a bookstore, you might set up a little stand on a boardwalk, something like that. You're learning a lot of skills at the same time. You're learning how to consolidate information. You're learning how to prioritize information, meaning that maybe you're not going to talk about a transit that happened a year ago. Maybe you're going to talk about a transit that's happening today, right? You're kind of prioritizing information. You got 20 minutes. And you're practicing the delivery of information. Also your delivery style. This might even extend to, the kind of dressings that you have on your table, right? You're like, oh, I brought this crystal didn't work for me. I brought an ephemeris, I didn't even open it up. I wish I would have hand drawn the chart. I wish I would have brought an iPad or something, a computer, to pull up the chart. So you're learning about delivery style, but also kind of what might be physically needed, right? And then you're also dealing with the unknown variables, such as someone saying, I don't know when I was born, or I don't know my birth time, or I was adopted, or maybe there's interruptions happening. So you're kind of dealing with a lot, and you're learning how to meet the situation or meet those interruptions, right? And deal with those on the fly. You're also learning bedside manner, right? And so mini readings is a great way for you to practice different kinds of hospitality, different kinds of bedside manner, versus a long form reading, which might be an hour, might be an hour and a half. So doing these kind of quick form readings gives you more kind of information about how you want to present your bedside manner. And then lastly, time management becomes really important, actually. You tell people you're doing a 20-minute reading, stick to it. If you want to go over, you ask them if that's okay. Anyone ever been to an appointment with a practitioner, a hairstylist, an acupuncturist, and they're going over 20 minutes? I'm like, I got things to do. I got to go to work. I don't want you to go over. So time management is also a key piece to building the container of approaching the chart, right? And there's more to that I'm going to speak to too. And then lastly, what I want to encourage you to do is to begin to build a database of case files in your brain, right? That mind prison, that mind palace. Start to fill that with um, um, things that you remember from transits that you watch, right? Or natal placements. So hearing someone give an interview or asking your friend questions. You're like, great, I have 3 kind of examples about what an Aquarius moon is. I have 3 examples of what Mars in Libra is. Begin to build that database. And you can do this just, again, in your brain, or something that I did 10 years ago was I built a spreadsheet. And so every time I noticed my roommate Marsing, I'm like, oh, that's another great example about Mars transits. Typing it, and building that database will be the key to reducing your prep time. So the more kind of examples that you have in your repertoire, the faster prep becomes. And so again, you can do this in whatever way works better for your brain. That could just be trying to remember them, recording them in a notebook, or putting them in a spreadsheet. Okay. Build that card catalog. And by the way, just as a tip, I'll actually go back really quick. Just as a tip, if you want, you can screenshot any of these slides, or this I think will live on YouTube too, so you can also pause and come back to it. Okay. All right. All right, so how to begin? The first thing that we're going to look at when we begin is defining yourself, right? Who are you? Who are you as an astrologer? Who are you? What can you add to your services? What can you provide to the community? What is different about you? I forgot to give you my big three. I am an Aries sun, so I'm a little competitive. So this gets into my competitive nature. But it's more about like, how do we differentiate ourselves from other people, right? And that's important to know because astrology is such a vast language that can be applied to so many different things. And so when students come to our school at the end of first year, there are students who do public health in astrology. There are students who do hair, right? They're beauticians, they're uh, stylists, and they incorporate astrology into that. There are students who are glass blowers, and they're putting astrology to their glass blowing practice. There are students who are bakers who are pairing astrology with baking. There are students who are social activists, applying astrology to this, students adding it to their spiritual practice, students adding it to their art practice, students building characters and writing stories and novels, students doing farming, students doing, there's so many different ways that continue to astound us with the first years at the end of the program. And so this is what I'm getting at. Like, what might you be able to offer or add to the way in which you do your astrology? Okay. So go with what you know. The thing about being an astrologer is that we can do whatever it is that we want to do. So if you're like, hey, I'm really good at moon signs, Uranus, I have no idea what that means, but moon signs, I am down. Then be the moon sign astrologer, right? Learn everything about the moon, right? Maybe you want to even add other things to that, like helping parents with their children, right? Because as children, we are more of our moon signs anyways, right? We're not really walking around with identities and egos. That's our sun. So our moon sign is really prominent when we're children. So there's a lot of room in there that we can explore as a practitioner. Also speaking for the moon is something our culture really devalues, discourages, ignores, so that might be another levels to look at the cultural piece of the moon. But again, you don't have to read everything. You don't have to know everything. Just go with what you know. So I also put a few other examples here, and these are just examples. So, there's an astrologer student who, instead of doing readings, they create playlists. That's their service, right? They look at your chart and create music for you to listen to really understand your own chart. There are students who type their reports. So you don't need to necessarily rent an office and deal with hospitality and follow up and all that stuff. You can type your report, right? And the person who wants your typed report will find you. It's kind of the magic. Make chart art. There are a lot of students who do that. There are a lot of people who, again, this is the service they provide, is creating art from your chart. Bring a specialized knowledge to your chart services. So if you know something about somatics, whether that be breath work or yoga poses or stretches or things that you might suggest to those that you're reading for, you could bring this layer in. Bring in a layer of gem remediation, bring in a layer of herbal medicine, bring in a layer of fictional book recommendations. One of our students was a librarian, and this was something that she would offer, is book recommendations to her clients, because that's a layer that she can add to her consultation. So again, just really trying to encourage you to think about who you are and how can you differentiate and how can you make this fun for yourself and fun for those that you're interacting with. Okay. So another way that we can uh, look to clues about what we could offer and who we are as astrologers is to also just look at our own damn charts. The information is encoded in our own charts. I gave you again some kind of examples here, and I've related them to the elements. So even if you're not too familiar with your own chart, but you know that you're really watery, or you know that you're really fiery, or if you don't even know that at all, you can just read these and go, oh yeah, that is kind of more like me. Maybe I am more airy. So, these are different kinds of chart reading styles, different ways that we might interact with clients. And I'm saying clients, but again, that could be friends, lovers, family, community, networks. It doesn't need to be, again, a kind of client, a business relationship. It could be that you're reading for people in your community. So when I say clients, that's what I mean. So for water, we've got counseling, empathy, empathetic, holding space, witnessing. Um, for those who might be more airy, we might be more info driven, more intellectual, more vision state oriented, and even more networking. And what I mean by networking is, providing information to the client, like, oh, you're under this transit, like, here's this herb, here's this book, go talk to this person, go take this class, right? Kind of information connecting. Fire. There are a lot of fiery astrologers that get people to move, like move their body through dance, again through somatic exercises, through storytelling, right? That's very fiery. To talk about maybe myth, or to give or paint a picture, give kind of this expressive way of understanding transits or natal placements. Encouragement, we always need that, don't we? Also, fiery people tend to be very inspiring, right? You're like, yes, Pluto's on your moon, but like, you got this. And here's an inspiring story, or an inspiring, encouraging piece I want to give you about yourself. Those who might be more earthy might be more data driven, more mechanical, more methodical, and also more technical. So we might look at patterns and waves and apply techniques and techniques and techniques to the chart to give more information. The other thing I want to drop in here too is maybe for those who might be a little bit more advanced, to consider the midheaven, right? The MC, that point in the sky, which will be at the top of the chart, right? And that point is really this kind of beacon or antenna that we use to kind of broadcast our message out to the world. And I'm actually going to give you a little story with this. So, me and my co-teacher, Rhea Wolf, who some of you might know, Rhea Wolf is a midheaven in Taurus, 10th house, Taurus midheaven, and it's conjunct the moon and Mars. So the midheaven is conjunct moon and Mars. Okay. I have a midheaven that's also in the 10th. It's in Gemini, and it's close to Venus in the North Node. So I'm a Venus North Node midheaven. Rhea is a Moon Mars Moon Mars midheaven. When I first started reading charts and kind of stepping out, putting a shingle out to read for others, I have kind of an intense chart. I've got a Saturn Pluto Sun thing in the 8th house, and so I really expected, because this is true in my personal life, that I attract a lot of really intense people. And so I really thought that what I needed to do was to go and get a counseling degree for astrology in order to properly kind of counsel people, because I assumed that the type of client I would get would be very intense and would have kind of intense things to bring. But being a midheaven in Gemini, which is very playful and very light and very maybe sampling and variety oriented, and also having Venus there too, the type of client I kept getting over and over and over was very different than I expected. They were more playful. They were more, if my chart was a cat, what kind of cat would it be? And that really surprised me for years because it was much more light and playful. And then I realized, oh, this is actually the branding that I'm giving off, right? And maybe at the time it was like my Facebook or the podcast that we had. And so people were picking up on that message that I was broadcasting and coming to me for it. They're like, oh, I love this. Just go shopping in the chart. That's very Gemini, right? For the smorgasbord, the variety. Just go shopping in my chart. Okay, sure, I will, whenever you want. Now, by contrast, my co-teacher, Rhea Wolf, has an intense chart and she's a moon Mars on the midheaven. And so she's very kind of emotive publicly, moon Mars. And so, on Facebook or whatever, she'll be like, I'm really pissed off, or I'm fucking hate this thing, or I'm depressed, or I'm really in joy, or I'm really in laughter and buoyancy, or I'm this and I'm this. And so a lot of people come to her because she's not afraid of that intensity. They kind of see publicly that she's not afraid of intensity. And so they're like, oh, you can hold this space for me. You can help me transform. You can create that container. And so it's a very different kind of client that she attracts. So I want you just to understand that or consider the midheaven because it might be how you approach a chart. Like, again, I'm like, great, I got to approach a chart in really intense ways. I've got to build a container that's really intense. But when people come and they're like, if my rising sign were a cat, what kind of cat would it be? It's a very different energy, right? It's a very different way of approaching the chart. Okay. All right. And then lastly, down here at the bottom, it just says that I do offer a chart service that's specifically geared toward what kind of astrologer am I. So we look at the chart, we reframe the natal chart in the context of being an astrologer, in the context, it's really a vocational reframe. It's like a vocational chart reading. And so we're looking at what kind of astrologer are you? What could you offer? How do we diversify your skill set? As well as your income streams, because that's usually the success to being an astrologer is to diversify your income streams. So what kind of skills does your chart already have encoded in it that we can then boost or lean into? All right. Oh, this is Jerry Blank from Strangers with Candy. It's a kind of a cult comedy with Stephen Colbert and Amy Sedaris, if you don't know. All right. So how to begin? Again, we're still defining. So we're defining boundaries, we're defining parameters. Again, this is important to approaching the chart, right? It is important, again, to kind of articulate the space, articulate the container, because this is going to give you a place to start, right? That's always the hard part. It's like, I'm looking at this, but where do I even begin? So if we're asking ourselves some of these questions, if we're doing a little bit of this personal work before we approach a chart, it's actually going to be a lot easier. It's going to give you a narrow focus, somewhere to start. So again, this is why we're doing this first. Defining your boundaries and parameters. Why? Who are you reading for and why? This is important when you're approaching a chart, right? Who are you reading for? And I don't mean that in a way like, what do you know about them previous to looking at their chart, but who is this person? Because sometimes the way in which we approach a chart will be different. I think about, some of the mistakes I made as a young astrologer, and this is actually very common too with my students. People often are so excited by astrology that they want to give everybody a reading, which is great. I'm not saying not to do that, but also understand that sometimes people that you are reading for, they don't want a reading. And so that can be very discouraging for everybody. It can be discouraging for the person receiving information, and it can be discouraging to you who's delivering the information. So one thing I like to remind people of is, does this person actually want a reading? Right? Ask them. Be like, hey, mom, do you mind if I look at your chart? Ask you some questions, give you some information. I might be wrong. That's another reason why it's important to get people who are pro astrology, because they are, again, invested in you. They like you. And so if you take a wrong turn, they're more willing to go, oh, no, that's not right. But they'll still understand. They're like, we still understand and support you learning astrology, and we're supporting you in taking a wrong turn. The challenge comes with, the student who has a lover who's skeptical of astrology, and then the student is really trying to like read for that person, the lover, constantly, and they're taking wrong turns and they're taking wrong turns and they're taking wrong turns and they're getting discouraged. And sometimes students have broken up with lovers because they don't support their astrology interest, and hey, that is valid. But if we can maybe try and not do that at first, that might, it's possible that could clear some heartbreak. So give a reading to people who want a reading. The thing that often happens when we give readings to people who don't want them is that we're trying to prove astrology to them. So don't try and prove of astrology. Don't try and prove the astro to other people. Just present the astro and present it in a non-judgmental way, right? I'm like, hey, Cancer is like this. Hey, Venus is like this. It's not like I'm trying to create a judgment around that. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment too. Be aware of guruism. I don't know if that's a word. I should have quoted it, but you probably get a sense of what I'm talking about. Guruism. There will be times in which either the practitioner, you, will be tempted by this, and there will probably certainly be times in which the client or friend or lover or family member will try and put this on you, right? And so this is creating an inherent power over dynamic. I mean, when we have a specialized knowledge about other people, we are in a power over dynamic. So we want to be very conscious of this. And we want to make sure that when people start to say like, oh, I didn't make that decision until you told me to, or, I can't make that decision until I counsel with you, or they're texting you at 3 a.m. and they're like, I had a fight with my mom. Is Mercury in retrograde? Oh no, you shut that stuff down immediately, right? You shut it down, shut it down. There's a lot that can be said for this kind of guruism, and maybe I would encourage you to look this up because it happens in a lot of fields. So there's a lot of information about it. It's not just in astrology. It might happen with therapists. It might happen with other kind of professional clinicians. And there's a lot of, again, kind of tips and support around this about how to train clients, about how to hold boundaries for yourself, because you don't want this. If you do this, you'll see why it's bad soon. You'll learn why it's bad. So, even if you're like tempted by it and you fall down that guruism hole, you'll learn, but just be aware of it. All right. Another thing I like to mention is just to encourage the client their own use of their personal authority, right? So I tell them, I'm like, hey, I'm just giving you information. Like, I don't know you. I don't know your life. I'm just presenting the information to you. Please do with it what you want. Listen to me. Don't listen to me. Use your own authority around the information. I also don't usually give yeses or nos. I just give, again, the information for the client to make up their mind. And I can help them with that decision-making process, obviously. But we always want to make sure that the client knows that they're in charge and that their personal authority always, always overrides the astrology, and their own personal experience always overrides the astrology. So if you're like Cancer moon, it's like this, and they're like, nope, then there's a lot to discuss in there. There's a lot to discuss in there. And that's actually for another time. But encouraging people to use their own authority is a way in which we build trust with people too. So again, building trust is really important. So we don't want to have the power over dynamic. We don't want to assert that. We don't want to take that on. Okay. When are we going to read a chart? When are we going to approach a chart? Well, structuring time to do this is really important. The time piece will become important when we talk about preparation in just a little bit. But some tips that I have for you here is, again, kind of similar with don't read for someone who doesn't want a reading. Don't chase clients. If you're interested in building a business, do not chase clients. I'll tell you that I chased clients maybe the first 3 or 4 years. The minute that I stopped chasing clients, clients came to me and I booked and I filled. And what chasing clients looks like is this, right? hey, here's an Instagram DM. Hey, I'm in town this weekend, but I'm only in town. I can only see you from 2:45 until 3:15. Can we get together? I really want a reading. No, I'm not doing that. I'm not bending over backwards for you. Um, what what you might want to do around this though, for those who, like they're in town, they've got a limited amount of time. Something that works for me is that as a practitioner, as someone who reads for clients in my office, I actually rent space from the school. I rent space from my own business. And so I'll tell clients, like, yes, if I'm willing, I'm like, yeah, you're only in town for Sunday. I don't work Sunday. It's not my client schedule. But you're a longtime client. I respect and love our relationship. So I'm willing to do this for you, but I have to actually roll over the office rental fee, right? Are you willing to do that? Is that something you're willing to do? So think about, again, if you are willing to kind of, I don't want to say bend over backwards, but if you are willing to kind of accommodate some of these people who might have a limited schedule, then think about what it is that you would need to accommodate them. Okay, so don't chase clients, but also we don't want to ignore relationships that we have. So think about what it is that you might need if you do want to do that. All right. Discourage contact outside of boundaries or parameters. This gets to like the texting piece at 3 a.m., that kind of stuff. I tell clients don't do that anymore, thankfully. I don't know why. Maybe I trained them. But I tell them what I'm willing and not willing to talk about after the consultation. So, I tell them, hey, you can call me, you can text me, you can email me about anything we've already talked about. So if I've met a client and we spent an entire hour on their moon or an entire hour on their rising sign, then after that consultation, I will only answer questions about the rising sign. They might email me and go, oh, I was reading about the notes. Can you tell me a little about that? Nope, I already told you, we're not talking about anything that we have not discussed in person, right? So again, you can kind of discover what your boundary might be, but let people know what that is too, and then hold it. Okay. What about reading at parties, or jamming out a chart on a bar napkin, or social spaces? Again, when you're just starting out and you feel inspired to do this, then do it. But when you've been reading for a certain amount of years, there may come a time when this flips for you. And it certainly did for me, and certainly does for a lot of students, where now the thing that you're doing that you were really excited by and inspired by is your work. And so it is your job then to kind of flip that person who's interested into a client, right? There are times in which I decide to do this, and there are times in which I don't decide to do this. But when I decide to do this, I'm like, yeah, you know what? You are really important to my family member. You're really important to my lover. I'm going to do this for you. We're at a Starbucks. Sure, why not? Let's do it. It sounds like fun. I will still say that when I decide to do that, half the time, it's still bad. It's still bad because we're not properly building a container. You're not in my office. I'm not giving you my kind of beginning spiel about what astrology does, what astrology doesn't do. And so, as I'm talking about your Leo moon, and then you're like, yeah, but like, what about like, nature versus nurture? Like, what about family? Like, what about culture? And like, yes, we talk about those things normally in my office. And so sometimes, even when I decide to give in and do this for fun, there's still pushback. There's still like, yeah, but, yeah, but, yeah, but. And so I'm like, hey, do you want a reading or do you not want a reading? So, just knowing how you operate in those spaces might be important. And also knowing in those spaces, typically people don't want to hear things that are more intense, and they don't want to hear things that are hard. So usually, what you become is the party astrologer, what you become is the parlor astrologer, what you become is entertainment. And so if you decide to do astrology in those spaces, just be aware that that might be the role that you're taking on, you're performing in some way. Okay. And actually, I wouldn't even recommend having really intense conversations. at a baby shower. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then the last thing we have here is where. So private space versus public space. So this kind of runs right into what we were talking about. This kind of bleeds right over. Um, uh, uh, I don't necessarily have a recommendation, but just questions for you. So, a private space, your house, an office, a phone conversation, there are benefits and drawbacks. And doing it in public, there are benefits and drawbacks. So just thinking about, if you're doing a reading at a coffee shop, are you talking about really intense stuff? Because the person that you're giving a reading to might really be uncomfortable with that and might really not like that you did this to them, right? They're like at a coffee shop. They might be expecting things to be very light and playful and easy. So thinking about confidentiality in public spaces, maybe when we're doing mini readings, if we're at a coffee shop, we don't want to bring up the things that are really intense in that space, because also time is limited in the mini reading, right? So thinking about what could be most appropriate for the space that we're in, or what is appropriate for the space that we're in. That's a question, right? The where. All right. How do we protect and guard physical space? So this might be, casting a circle. This might be, again, making sure that people aren't within earshot, right? Making people feel very safe. And when I say people, I mean clients or whoever we're reading for, making them feel safe, making them feel protected, making them feel like you've got their back, you're leading this conversation. They can add in when they feel comfortable, when they feel safe, encouraging their own personal authority. How do you kind of build that physical container? Hospitality, that's another thing to consider. Do I offer them tea? Do I sit them in a comfortable chair? Where do we sit? Maybe we don't even sit at all, right? Maybe I had a walking therapist. I'm a Moon Mars Mercury conjunction, so I love kind of talking and processing while moving physically. Maybe that's what you do too. Maybe that is your physical space. You're the walking astrologer. Okay. And then what are you doing before and after a consultation? So you'll learn about this. The more and more charts you read, you'll get a sense of what you like and don't like about your pre-consultation setup and your post-consultation care. And this is for both your client and for you, right? Because some people read for clients and they're like, oh man, I gotta go take a shower. Like I gotta go take a nap. Like I'm so drained. And some people can go to karaoke afterwards. That's me. I'm really jazzed after I do consultations. And some people really feel drained in person, in which then maybe the telephone really works well because we're not in physical proximity. So, reading as many charts as possible is going to give you information about how all of this works for you. So another huge encouragement for you to just keep reading charts, just keep reading charts, just keep looking at charts, just keep looking at charts, just keep talking about charts, just keep talking about charts. All right. The gateway. Okay, the gateway into the chart. Okay. So everybody here, I don't know if you do, but I would really encourage everyone to develop a key, to develop a way into the chart, and to be consistent with that up into a certain point. So, you might notice that every time you look at a chart, your eye is constantly drawn to the moon. Great. That is your key. That is your key for right now, and be consistent with that key. So, maybe you notice that for the next year, all you do is start with the moon. And then again, that can change. Then you start noticing that your eye wants to enter into the chart by looking at the ascendant. Then go with that for for an extended period amount of time. I say be consistent, but also understand that that could change, that your key could change. Mine changes every few years. So currently my key is the ascendant. I always enter into the ascendant, talk about the ascendant, and the key then leads you around the rest of the chart. So if you've got this kind of place to start that you always begin at, that'll be the thread that you pull. you know how like a sweater, you peel a sweater, it starts to unravel. This is like the thread that you pull that then gets you into the rest of the chart. And then all of a sudden you're bouncing from the ascendant to Mars in the sixth, and then Mars, you know, you're kind of moving around the chart because you've entered in somewhere. So just starting somewhere, just starting at this key, something that is constantly calling you, right? And it might be something that you have a fair amount of knowledge about, you know. So if you are um, you know, again, like the moon is a really great one. If you have information about the nodes, you're like, great, the nodes, I love it, I talk about it all the time, I'm ready to do it right now. Then enter into the chart by the nodes always, right? And then again, that might change in a couple of years, but just be consistent with that key. Try out different stuff, see what works for you. What do I have here? Just read this list in case you can't see it. Aspect clusters, elemental composition, right? You know, am I fiery, am I watery? A stellium or concentration of planets in a particular sign or house or hemisphere. You know, our eyes might be drawn to this. Asteroids or asteroid, Chiron or Juno or Vesta, any of the angles, right? Maybe all of them. You're like, great, I'm the angle astrologer. I'm always going to talk about the angles. I mean, they are the anchors to the chart, right? They're the pillars of the chart, so they're important. Pluto and generational signatures. I'm trying to get kind of really specific here for you. So if you're like, I love this idea, Pluto and the generational signatures, then start there, right? Even in mini readings, you know, just like go with what you know. You're like, oh, I know about that. Let's talk about it. Societal planets. Like again, I'm trying to be very specific here. You're like, I love Jupiter and Saturn. Then start with those. Start with those two. Another way that you might enter into the chart is through a particular, you know, theoretical orientation, a particular branch of astrology. And so you're really kind of interested in a certain kind of techniques, or again, a chart, a house system, something like that. Then you might employ those techniques first, and that's your gate, your key, your gateway into the chart. Okay. So actually, let me give you an example, just so because I don't want to run with the assumption that everyone knows what I'm talking about. So maybe you want to use like the evolutionary astrology technique of looking at planets square the nodes, right? Square the nodes within 3 degrees. This is commonly discussed as a skipped step. So maybe you read a few books about this, listen to a few podcasts, go to a few classes, and then you want to start with this technique. You're like, you're always looking to see if a planet is square the nodes. You know, it's not always going to be the case, but just as an example of a particular technique that's rooted in a particular branch of astrology. Okay. All right. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Approaching the chart. Okay. So, when we're approaching the chart, something that really helps people, there's 2 things and they're opposite. One is sometimes having a place to go is a great place to start. So if someone's like, oh, I want you to look at my chart, then be like, okay, what specifically do you want me to look at? Right. And maybe you can actually just get one thing, because then they might go, oh, I want you to look at this and this and this and this and this. Just ask for one. Just be like, great, can I start with that one? I'm just going to look up that one. I'm just going to talk about that one thing that you've given me, that one topic, that one inquiry. Because if you don't get an inquiry, then what might happen is you might prepare for everything the person might ask, which could be a 12-hour prep. Oop, I'm still live, aren't I? Something just flashed. Okay. I think I am. Okay. It looks like it's a recording at least. Okay. So get an inquiry, get a question, and if your client, friend, family member doesn't have an inquiry or they're not quite sure, then you can help them formulate that. Right? You could be like, are you curious about this? Are you curious about this? If it's relationships, then then you've got a place to go. You can look at the seventh, you can look at the fifth, you can look at the ruler of those houses. So in the example in this picture here, we've got Gemini in the seventh, so we can look at Mercury to get more information. We've got Aries on the fifth, so we can look at Mars and get more information. We can look at Mars and Venus. I also like to look at Mars, Venus, and the moon when there's a question about relationships. So these two houses, fifth, seventh, their rulers, where are they? Any planets in those signs? And then the planets of Mars, Venus, Moon. Kind of a lot, I know, but you can start real small. You can start real small, real simple. You can just do fifth, seventh. You could just do Venus, Mars, something like that. But you got a place to start. The other way to start is the exact opposite. You might really love not having a question. And so that's a possibility that maybe you're really invested in your astrological education. And so you're just like, I want to read everybody's chart, which means that I want to prep for any question that anyone might ask me. And every time I do a chart reading, it will be a 12-hour prep. Hey, there are people like that. So there are students like this. So, they're kind of like challenged by or thrilled by the opportunity that anything might come up. And so they'll study a ton. And that's, again, a very valid way of approaching the chart, a very valid way of starting. But probably for a lot of us, it's getting a specific inquiry or topic. Okay. Yeah. Go shopping in the chart. That's actually having Gemini midheaven. That's what a lot of my clients come to me with. They're like, I don't have a question. Never had a reading before. I was just curious. Gemini buzzword. I was just curious. I just wanted you to tell me what you see. So I had to learn how to learn everything because it was the kind of client I was seeing over and over and over. Okay. Hand drawing the chart. There is a plus to this that I'm going to talk about, but hand drawing the chart is really a signature of the Portland School of Astrology. We teach our students to do this by hand. We teach them about color theory. We work from the ephemeris. And a lot of our staff are doing this. A lot of kind of friends of the school or friends of our students are doing this well now. And hand drawing the chart does two things I want to mention. It helps for a lot of people, kind of taking the time to draw up the chart, to color the chart, to write in the symbols, to draw the lines. For some people, what this does is it helps to kind of busy the body so that we can begin to kind of intuitively get information about the chart, to begin to have vision states, or to let the knowledge come that's accumulated in our brains. It can be really beneficial to kind of have this meditative process of erecting a chart versus just printing one out. So a lot of our students see the value that hand drawing has brought to them in their consultation skills. So it's a tip that I want to share with you, that hand drawing a chart. And when I say hand drawing the chart, it does not mean that you have to look at an ephemeris and try and do all this math. No, you can go to astro.com, plug in the chart data, look at the chart on your screen, and then hand draw it right off the screen. That's totally fine. And it's accurate, right? So do that. Play with this, play with color, play with your own style, because you might see that this is a way in which the information is starting to come to you. And when I hand draw a chart, I don't watch TV. I'm kind of not distracted. This is another kind of tip around that. All right. The other thing that I really love about hand drawing the chart, which might become important later if you do want to see clients, is that it does elevate the experience to the client. It does elevate your maybe perception of skill and mastery. It elevates the astrology, honestly. When people see hand drawn charts, we haven't seen this in several decades. So people are like, whoa, what? Like, my chart is not a computer printout. I've never seen this before. They're very delighted by colors, by the senses, the sensory information that's in the chart. So really play with that. It's another way, again, to kind of connect with the chart, to connect with the client, to delight the client. and to convey a higher sense that the art form of astrology, the science of astrology, like what we do is not just a computer printout. It's not reduced. It's not reductive. It is this kind of art and science. Okay. Yeah, right. And again, because I'm an Aries, when you hand draw your chart, it's a competitive edge, right? You're differentiating yourself from a lot of other people. Okay. All right. Approaching the chart, preparation. All right, so we got some preparation tips here. Set time limits for prep. This is important. It's again, I said 12-hour prep. Some of you are out there going, yeah, speak to the choir, 12-hour prep over here. Nothing to be ashamed of. I was a 12-hour prepper. My teachers were 12-hour preppers. My students, some of them are 12-hour preppers now. Prepping is a real challenge, right? Anyone out there? You can raise your hand. I'll feel it. I felt one. All right. Challenging. Preparation is challenging. It's really important that we're trying to refine this every time. And maybe not every time. Maybe you set a goal and you're like, okay, my prep time is 10 hours. So, for the next 3 months, we're going to prep for 3 hours. For summer, for fall, can I prep for 8? So every chart reading I'm doing in the fall, I'm doing 8 hours. It also is helpful if you have a goal. If you're not charging money, maybe you want to read once a week or you want to read once every other week. And then for the fall, you're prepping. If you're reading one every other week, maybe you're reading 7 in that quarter. And so you're prepping 7 charts at 8 hours. Okay, for winter, I'm going to also read 7 charts, but I'm going to prep in 6 hours, right? So I'm prepping in 6 hours. Put this kind of structure to your prep because it's going to help you to stay on track. It's going to help you to refine your skills. And it's also going to pressure you to get better. One thing that pressured me in reducing my prep time was just running out of time. Just being like, oh, I woke up late. They're coming. They're on their way to my office right now. Or, I just have too much to do and I didn't prep for 10 hours. I only prepped for 6 hours. Oops, what's going to happen? And it always worked out, right? So if you can, reduce that prep time, keep getting it smaller and smaller and smaller, it's gonna help you. Another thing that really helps me with prep is having that library of case files in my brain. I actually don't prep anymore at all, never. Because there's so much charts that I've looked at, so many examples that I'm able to actually kind of conjure those up quickly and easily, talk about the astrology, give a lot of examples, and it fills the time really easily. And then it's able to convey what it is I want to say about the client's chart. So the more charts you do, the smaller the prep time. The more charts you look at, the smaller the prep time. All right. Stick with natal and transits, or maybe not even, maybe just natal. Don't even do transits, but stick with something small. Okay, so I think, our tendency is to add more and more and more and more and more because we want to give a lot of information to people. We want to look like we know what we're talking about. We want to just have a lot of information for people. It's really, really best. And I know that some of you aren't going to hear me with this, but it's really best if we just stick with one thing. Stick with natal. If you want to add something else, go to transits. But don't try and do so many techniques. It confuses people, it dilutes the reading. Again, if we're playing, if we're just having fun, if we're really trying to see how this works and how to deliver the information, then great, go wild. But if you're really trying to prep and you're really trying to focus, then focus. Okay, really focus, really concentrate, get it down to brass tacks, get it down to bare bones here. So just do natal and then maybe transits. The pro tip here is to know what not to add. And this is what I'm constantly having to tell my students because they're getting overwhelmed. And so, and I understand that. when I went to NORWAC, if people are familiar with the Northwest Astrological Conference in Seattle every May, um, when I would go to NORWAC every year, I'd have to take the entire month of June off because I was so inundated with so many techniques, so many ideas, so many lectures that it was overwhelming. I couldn't like integrate. I couldn't let that settle. So it's important to know what not to add. It's important to know what not to study. You know, like I said, I've been studying since the 90s, and I'm all asteroids, no thank you. Fixed stars, not today. It's important to know what not to study. You know, do what you do really well. And then when you become bored or you want to add something to your toolkit, then add that, but just do it one by one, so that you're not overwhelming yourself. Okay. Okay. No, 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 no. Get prep time down. So how do we get prep time down? We get an inquiry. We do more consultations. Maybe you take me up on my suggestion of doing mini readings. Hopefully you're consistently looking at charts again. People you know, people you don't know. Just looking at charts as much as possible. Um, Building a library of case file examples. Finding books and sources that you like. And I have some suggestions for you, but you might already have a few that you like. I don't know if there's a chat, but if we do have a chat, some of you can add those titles or links in the chat. Okay. Um, all I see is my slideshow here. Okay. Pro tip: run away. So something that helped me early on. I don't do this anymore. Well, because I don't prep, I guess. So one thing that helped me early was hand drawing the chart and then running away, like leaving it, right? Like hand drawing the chart the day before the consultation, or hand drawing the chart and going for a walk, or drawing the chart and making lunch, or drawing the chart and taking a shower. Sometimes getting distance between you and the chart is a way that you'll let the chart begin to speak to you. So as I'm moving about the day, or as I'm moving about that break, that physical separation, I'm allowing the chart to speak to me. Right. So sometimes if we're just staring at a chart, we're like, oh my gosh, why isn't anything coming to me? Yeah. We can leave the chart behind and let that process unfold. A lot of these suggestions that I'm giving to you all, again, is just about how you are going to discover the way, the method, the technique that you use to approach the chart. Because it's bigger, it's way bigger than trying to know houses, planets, sign, getting that information, that kind of info, that knowledge. Approaching a chart is way bigger than that. So all of these kinds of ideas are really just meant for you to play with, because you'll start to discover the style it is that you use to approach the chart. Okay. So play with it. Be like, yeah, I ran away. I ran away for a quarter. Again, like Saturn, this process. For a whole quarter, I'm going to draw the chart and run away and see if JP's tip worked for me. It didn't work for me. Okay, great. Now I know that's not the way I approach a chart. Okay, I'm going to try this other thing, and maybe I'm going to try it for a quarter. Again, kind of Saturning the process. I'm going to try it for the whole 3 months and see, does that work for me? Does it not work for me? All right. Delivering information, the use of language. All right. As I mentioned this earlier, actually, I mentioned this earlier, what astrology does and does not do. That's important to say, right? Um, I've kind of mentioned it earlier, but this is part of the like top of the reading, top of the consultation spiel that I have. I have like a little note card with 4 bullet points of things that I say to every client before we start. And this is one of them, about what astrology does and doesn't do. Because there's a lot of misconceptions about what astrology does and does not do. So I like to just demystify that a little bit and let them know what it is that I'm giving them and what my job is as an astral clinician. And that's what we are, right? Astral clinicians. It's our job to give that information. I don't believe it's our job to make the decision. Uh-oh, recording stopped. Oh, And we're back. Yes. So telling people what you are, that you're a conduit of information, that you're really just here to present the astrology, right? You're really just here to have an unbiased approach. You're just delivering information about a Capricorn moon. You're like, here's what a Capricorn moon is like. And of course, we're like, getting information from clients and checking in with them, but letting them know what it does and does not do. Ptolemy's four influences on a human life. This is an idea, a concept that the school has adopted, that probably not very many people have heard about, but it is kind of permeating out with our students and our staff. Ptolemy's four is this, 200-plus-year-old idea that sounds quite modern. Uh-oh, recording stopped. It sounds quite modern, but it's very old. And so what Ptolemy says is that there are four layers to how a human operates in the world. And one of those is astrology. Only one is the astrology layer. And the way that I see it, it's actually kind of top down. So astrology is way up here, right? The planets and the signs, the celestial markers, the celestial blueprint, which is our chart, right? The astral schematic. So we've got the astral schematic, the astrology layer, and then underneath that is the cultural layer. And what we're talking about here is kind of large, like culture with a capital C. I almost said capital Q, culture. Culture with a capital C. So that could be, for instance, something that's really dominating the globe, right? Something like capitalism, something like patriarchy, those kinds of big cultural concepts. We are learning about ourselves and operating in that layer too. So we're both the astrology layer, the cultural layer, and then the regional layer, which Ptolemy actually says, what he says is like, he says like people of the forest are different than people of the desert, are different than people of the sea. And so what he's really talking about here is like locale, right? And so we might think about that in a kind of country context, like, different countries have different ideas and cultures and norms, but also even different regions within a country have different cultures and history and norms. So think about, for instance, the American South versus, say, the Northeast, right? Um, there's a different history. There are different kind of underpinnings, social underpinnings. There are different kind of social mores and expectations. There might be different kind of religious undertones. Um, uh, right. So thinking about how the region also shapes us. And then lastly, family, the family layer, which we might also put DNA in here now. So the family also influences us. And this is also important to remember when we're prepping a chart, when we're delivering a chart, when we're thinking about the charts that we're looking at constantly, because we never quite know how someone is working the astrology. We will never know. We'll never know. That's what the client has. That's what they have. That's what the person who's not us has, right? Astrology does not exist in a vacuum. And so this is an important tip when it comes to talking to people, to delivering information. You're just going to focus on the astral layer. You're just going to say, hey, this is what a Capricorn moon is. Now, here are three examples of real life people with Capricorn moons and how they're working that energy because of the different bodies they're in, because of the different experiences they have, because of their different religious backgrounds, because of their different sexual orientations, because of their different race and ethnicities, all of these different kind of contributing factors that create the multitude of Capricorn moon experiences. So it's your job just to focus on the astrology layer, but leave room for the others. And the room for the others, is really for the client to inform you of. The cultural layer, obviously, you might know more about that than the family layer, right? Because you live in that culture too. So as I mentioned, if you wanted to be the moon sign astrologer, our culture has a hard time, our culture in the United States and the West, in capitalism, we have a hard time with the moon because the moon impedes progress. it halts progress, it pauses progress, it stops progress, because we've got to stop and take care of ourselves. We've got to stop and check in. We've got to stop and feed our bodies. We've got to stop and go to sleep. We've got to stop and hang out with friends. We've got to stop and connect with family. We've got to stop and journal about our dreams. And so we often, again, kind of think of the moon as frivolous. We think of it as unimportant. We think of it as getting in the way. Our culture does. So we also know something as a astral clinician about the cultural layer, right? And that needs to be considered and examined too. So again, my tip here for you is to focus on the astrology layer, and also remember that astrology does not exist in a vacuum. And so you can and do have some cultural information to work off of too, right? When we talked about signs, that was the lecture I did before too, I mentioned this. I talked about how certain signs have a cultural bias against them, how certain signs have a sign bash against them. And that has everything to do with the culture that we are in and not the energy of the sign, right? The energy of the sign is actually quite neutral, right? It's like, Scorpio's like this, and Scorpio's like that, and Scorpio's like this, and Scorpio's like that. But how that's interpreted then are those other layers. Okay, I'm going to let that go for now. But again, that's a tip. Just focus on the astrology. That's all you have to do. Just focus on the astrology, and then we can connect with the client about anything else related to how they're working that energy. How to talk about the astrology. How much astrology talk do you bring in? This is a question I see a lot in conferences. I mean, we have it at the school. I see it in online spaces. How much astrology do you bring into the consultation? It's important just to notice how much you do or don't do. I don't really have a feeling either way. And here's why. Because as an astrologer, there's a little bit of astrology talk that I actually have to bring into the reading because it's my process. It's my gateway into the chart. So I have to say, Mars opposed Saturn means blah, 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 blah. Right? I have to. That's just how my brain works. And I know that that's true about myself, and that's why I am accepting of that. And that's why I want to give you license to do what it is that you might do, because you might need to do it as your process. But if you are doing it because you don't know what Mars and Saturn opposite are, and so you're like, this is an opposition. It's 180 degrees. A circle is 360 degrees. But if you cut in half, it's 180. And that's denoted by this line. And an opposition is like this. Then you're just talking about all of the technical pieces, maybe because you don't know what the Mars-Saturn opposition is. And so then that's information for you, right? You're like, okay, I'm bringing in too much of the technical. I need to focus more on the interpretation. So just being aware of what your process is around that. Again, I don't think it's necessarily wrong or bad to bring astrology technicals into the consultation, but just be aware of why you do it. Okay, why you do it. Fatalistic language versus possibility-oriented language. So this is fun. For 3 years, I did this astrology and art project at the Portland Art Museum every Friday night. And we had this astrology dice, and people would ask a question, they would roll the dice, and then I would give them pieces in the museum to go and look at, to contemplate, to reflect, to get the answer to their own question based on the archetype that they saw in the museum, the piece that they saw in the museum. Really fun. It was called Canvas in the Cosmos was the project. I was really shocked by the amount of people. There weren't a lot of people, by the way, who did this, but the amount of people who did do this was a lot. So, people who are really skeptical, they're like, oh, I don't know about this. This is really like fate-based, or, those kinds of things we hear a lot, being astral clinicians. I love that word. But when they would give in, they'd be like, no, this is like handing of your authority. No, this is very fate-based. But when they would actually give in, they'd be like, okay, I'll give it a try. The way that they asked questions was very fate-based. They're like, should I leave my partner? Will I get this job? Those are fate-based questions, right? They don't leave a lot of room for nuance. They don't leave a lot of room for interpretation. And so we don't want to deliver information in a fate-based way. We don't want to say, you should leave that job. You will get that apartment. We want to give people information that's more, puts the authority again back in their hands. So possibility oriented language is like, actually, what I say in the chart about the chart is I never even say you. I never tell the client like you. I say, yes, what this chart needs is, what this chart wants is, what Mercury and Sagittarius is looking for is, those are the kinds of words I'll use. I'll say, oh, what the ancients would say about this is, or, what I know about that aspect is, oh, recording stop. We're back. What I know about this aspect is, more languages like this, like, you might want to try blank, you may have luck with blank, might, may. What's possible is, the possibilities of this transit are, the possible outcomes are, kind of giving, reframing in this way, again, kind of doesn't strip client of authority. And I sometimes I actually have to keep reminding the client of this. It's not always, but it does happen sometimes. Let's say actually rarely, but where a client's like, oh, I was really hoping that you would just tell me what to do. Okay, well then go see someone else who will do that, because that is not me. I don't tell you what to do. My job is to give you the information. If you want to make a decision based on that information, though, still, I can keep refining and helping you do that. But I'm not going to say, you should do this. When someone's like, I don't like my job, I'm like, great, let's talk about what kind of job you would like. Okay, now, does the things that you need in a job, are they present in the job you have? That's what I'm saying to them. So I'm not saying, oh yeah, you should totally leave it. No, I'm saying, this is what your chart wants. Is that what you have? And then the client goes, no. And then I go, great, what are we going to do about that? And they're saying, okay, I'm going to look for a new job, or I'm going to go get a new job. Great, I've helped you make that decision. I didn't tell you what to do. All right. So just a little nod to fatalistic, fate-based languaging versus free will-based languaging. And then checking in with the client during the consultation. Is there anything that you want to say or ask about this? This is what I say. I also see this sometimes discussed on online spaces. Sometimes I see, maybe like what I see often, or at least lately, is like, the astrologer should only be talking 50% of the time. I'll tell you from experience that that is not my client base. They're like, hey, just go shopping the chart. They want to be entertained. They're like, just tell me everything. And then they just sit back and they don't give me anything. So that's not always going to be the case, that the consultation is a 50-50 back and forth. However, I do have certain chart types that are a discussion. So the what kind of astrologer am I? That is a 50-50 back and forth. So it might depend on the chart service. But one thing that I really like to ask is this: is there anything that you want to say or ask about this? Because again, that question puts the authority in the client's hands. So when I'm talking about something that's rather intense, or I'm touching on something that could be really sensitive, I don't want to say, in which ways were you traumatized by this? I want them to tell me that if they're comfortable telling me that. And so I'm like, what do you want to say about this? What do you want to ask me about this? What questions do you have for me? What clarifications can I make about that? And, half the time they'll share, and half the time they'll go, I know what you're talking about, and I don't want to share. And I'm like, great, please don't. I mean, it's their choice. We're putting it in their hands. We're giving them the authority. So that's a great question that I like to use, and I would encourage you. You can use it. You can take it from me. No trademark. All right. Uh-oh. Um, it says recording stopped. I don't know if I'm still here or not. Hang on. Also, I don't know if you were all here, but Stormy left as well. So I'm just worried that I am actually not broadcasting. Oh, I wonder, I could probably go to that YouTube page to see if I'm on it. Smart JP. See. Hmm. I don't see on YouTube that that is the case. So, hmm. Oh, okay. I just got a text from Stormy. It says, yes, you're still on. Okay. Recording stopped though. Hmm. Record. I'll record to some. Okay, I'll just do that. I'll just do it. Okay. Are you all still with me? I understand the complexities because I run a school. It's Mercury retrograde. All this stuff happens all the time. Okay, so I don't know if I'm live or if you're watching this back later, but we were just finishing up here delivering the information, how to talk about astrology. And I was saying, please ask the client, is there anything you want to say or ask about this? Because that puts that authority back into their hands and they're able to decide what it is that they want to share, how much they want to share, and what clarifications they might need. All right, moving on. So let me just tell Stormy, I just started the recording again. Stormy? Okay. Great. So delineation. So I wanted to give you three different ways to think about your style of how you might kind of synthesize the information of a chart, put it together. Um, there's three ways that I just made these up. These aren't like, this is just a JP thing. There's the step-by-step method, there's the combination method, and then there's the intuitive method. So the teacher style, this is what I call this, the teacher style, because this is actually the way in which I do a chart or approach the chart. The way that I do the consultation with clients is we'll talk about planet. So I'll say, this is the moon or this is Mars. This is like the energy of that planet, right? Kind of give them that information about the planet, give them some stories, some information, what that planet does, the action of that planet, and then talk about the sign. And so we're putting planet plus sign, right? It's kind of a step by step. We're adding this other layer of sign on top of it. And so we have talked about planet, we'll talk about sign. I'll kind of pull pieces of Mars through that Taurus lens as we're discussing Taurus. Um, and then lastly, we'll put the layer of the house on. Um, on top of that. So it's like, this is Mars and Taurus, and it's happening in this area of your life, right? The ninth house is ways in which information is disseminated. So when we get fired up, Mars, we might want to do something practical, Taurus, in the way that we disseminate information. Oh, well, when I get really fired up, I make zines and put them all around town. Great. There's a match for that Mars and Taurus in the ninth. So Mars and Taurus in the ninth, I talk about again, planet, sign, house. If you're more advanced, then what I also then do is pull in aspects to Mars. So I'll talk about Mars, Taurus, ninth house, and then its opposition to Saturn, how that Mars in Taurus is kind of changed or altered or adjusted because of the aspect that it has. And I just wrote more advanced because if you are just starting out, then just try this Mars planet sign house and then do aspects a little bit later. Another way to delineate a chart is to kind of synthesize and combine and mix all three of those together. And so you might be the kind of astrologer who doesn't bring a lot of astrology wording to the consultation, and that might be this style of delineation. You might look at Mars in Taurus in the ninth, and then you might say, when you get fired up, you do something practical and distribute that, right? The ways information flows, ninth house, teaching, publishing, travel, right? Information flows through travel. So you might just say the thing rather than do the step-by-step. But the step-by-step is my process. So I do that. But your process might be that you combine it first and then give an interpretation second. Okay. The intuitive style is the use of the chart. We kind of use the chart as our launch pad, as a way to then get into the intuitive space where maybe we're not actually even looking at the chart anymore, right? We're actually pulling in information that maybe if you're an intuitive, you're pulling from guides, or you're channeling from their guides or your guides, or allies that you have connections with, plants, animals, angels, guides, guardians, ancestors, right? We're kind of relying on that realm, but we're using the chart and the symbols and the mechanics to kind of jump off of. And that might be your style too. So just play with all three. If you're not quite sure, play with all three. You might notice that you're a combination of two, right? You might notice that you are step-by-step and intuitive, or you're combining and intuitive, or you're step-by-step and combining. That might be true. But play with these different kinds of ways to approach the chart. Okay. And I'm sure that you might have heard this before. It's a really common kind of synthesis motif, this kind of tool of looking at the chart, is to think of the chart as a theatrical play. And so the planets are the characters, they have actions and roles, they have wants and desires. They're like, I'm here to do this and I'm here to say that, and don't look at me, I'm shy, whatever it might be. And then the signs are what they're wearing. It's like the costuming, or it's like the filter or the mood or the lighting, right? Which can be really warm and inviting, or really stark in contrast, or really dark and we can't see. The signs are that filter, that mood. Again, it might be like the costuming, like the clothes that the characters are wearing. Might be a way to think about it. And then the house is the location, right? It's the set. You all play Clue, that old board game Clue. It's kind of like, you're like, Mrs. Is Miss Green one? Miss White? Okay, Miss White in the conservatory with the candlestick. You're right, it's a very similar kind of structure to building the synthesis of planet, sign, and house. It's Mr. Green, right? Yeah, okay. All right. Oh, this is a picture of our consultation room at the school, the space, if you're curious. So I've got some more tips for delineation here for you. Give examples. So this is what I do. Again, I deliver the kind of non-judgmental information about Mars and Taurus in the ninth. right? So just the astrology piece. Then I give real life examples of what I've noticed about Mars in Taurus, what I've noticed about Mars in the ninth. You know, again, those kind of case file examples that I've collected over the years from having looked at charts. And that might be just a tip for you. Consider doing this. You're like, great, I'm going to talk to this person about their chart. And maybe I want to just prepare. What is Mars? What is Taurus? What is the ninth? Write all that stuff down and then deliver that, right? Give that information. And then if you've got examples, then give that information. But that's typically what I do with the client. You know, I'll talk about Mars, I'll talk about Taurus, I'll talk about the ninth, and then I'll give examples of that just to make it concrete so they can see how exactly that energy is playing out in real life cases and real life scenarios. And the same is true with transits. So I'll talk about Uranus square the moon, if that's the transit that they're having, Uranus square the moon. Then I'll give examples of what Uranus moon transits look like, right? And notice that I said Uranus moon. I didn't even say Uranus square moon. Um, the square will denote like the kind of intensity of that, right? So I'll talk about Uranus moon contacts just generally, just to give the examples of what that could look like in their life, what to expect during that transit. And allow the chart to lead you. So we did talk about this too, but you know, just allow that process to kind of unfold. And I cannot stress enough just to notice what you're noticing. So if you're like, I'm talking about Mars and Taurus in the ninth, and I'm actually not done, but my eye is pulling me over here, then you make a decision to stop talking about Mars and Taurus in the ninth and go over here. But just note that. Just note that you did that because it's not necessarily wrong or right. It's just something that is pulling you. And so sometimes kind of leaning into the impulse, leaning into the intuitiveness of how the chart is leading you can lead you into more fruitful ways of delineating a chart, more fruitful ways of working with that chart that you didn't know before. So again, really be aware of the process, really be aware of the process. When you're done with the consultation, take a bunch of notes for yourself about what you liked, what you didn't like, what worked, what didn't work. And really focus on you, really focus on what you liked and what you didn't like, and less about how the client's face looked. Because you're going to deliver information in the same way and they're going to have a different reaction every time. So they're not a great gauge. You could, you know, solicit for feedback, especially when you're beginning and starting, but really, again, just notice how you felt. What did that feel like in your body? Did that feel good? Did that not feel good? Did that work? Did that not work? Was that thrilling and exciting? Was that really scary and I don't know, ungrounding? It's not good or bad, it's just information. So really try and notice that, record it, and note when it happens again or it doesn't happen again. Just keep noticing that process. Please, if you take anything away from this lecture, it's keep looking at charts and notice your process. What is working? What is not working? Try something different. Try something different. Try something different. All right. Talk about whatever you know. So that's something that scares people when they're trying to step out and talk to people and talk about charts and move into more of a consulting space. They're like, what do I talk about? What do I talk about? Just talk about what you know. Again, if you know a lot about the moon, just talk about the moon for an hour. Just fill the space with the moon. If you just listen to a podcast about Pluto generations, jump to that, right? You know, doing mini readings, like when I was first starting out 10 years ago and did a lot of mini readings, I would just go with whatever drew my eye. I'm like, okay, sun signs. Well, that's the seasonal imprint of who they are. I can talk about the season of Virgo. I can talk about the season of Pisces. That's just a place to start, right? Just talk about whatever you know. If you've just read a book about Neptune, then talk about Neptune. People will be enthralled. They'll be like, wow, that's me. I have a Neptune. I love it. You'll really impress people. Just talk about what you know, right? And obviously, you're going to keep learning. But if you've just listened to something, just heard a lecture, just watched something, just read something, talk about it. It also is really helpful because you're putting those ideas to language. You're putting the brain into the tongue. And so you're able to kind of articulate through your own words what it is that you've just learned. And you're practicing that speech, right? And as you keep talking about Neptune or Pluto generations or the moon, it'll become faster, it'll become easier, it'll become quicker. You'll start to add more things and more things and more things. So really develop that tongue. Talk about what you know. Go with what you know. All right. And then last, good info, bad info. I really want to caution people against the two things I see most often when people start. One, they are the doom and gloom astrologer. Everything's terrible. You suck. This is going to be a challenge. You might die. And then the opposite of that is everything's great. You're amazing. Oh, I just love it. This transit can be so good for you. You should leave that job. You should go in there. You should travel. You should do this. You should try yoga. You should try meditation. The kind of Pollyanna astrologer, right? So one is like all bad and one is like all good. What I want to say to you when you're doing a consultation is, again, depending, we talked about this earlier, depending on where you are physically and the space, it may be your job to talk about things that are challenging. And what you'll find is if you've built a proper container, again, a baby shower, maybe not the great place. Applebee's, maybe not the great place to do this. But when you do talk about things that are challenging to the client in, again, a space that's set up properly, they will really appreciate and respect that you brought this up, because often people are like, I felt this way my whole life. Like, you've really validated something in my chart that's really kind of crunchy, something that's hard, something that's a little sensitive. And so I want to say, don't be afraid to talk about what is intense in the chart. We just need to be sensitive to how we deliver that information and where we deliver that information, but always speak to the highest good of the chart, right? Like, we do want to bring something good in always. So even if you are a little bit more doomy and gloomy, not exactly that, but you're like, yeah, I'm not afraid of intensity and challenge. We're going to go there. And that's what we're all going to talk about the whole time. You do want to bring in things that are positive and helpful and really speak to what makes that person them, right? Really validating what's beautiful and wonderful and juicy about that person. But then also bringing in what's really challenging and intense. Okay. One thing that I find to be really helpful in transits specifically is that I make sure that actually we hit all the heavy transits for the year, because I want them to be prepared. I want people to have that information. Then I always talk to them about good transits, happy transits, good transits that they're having. I leave on that. But the difficult transits, I always provide them with a timeline too. So what's wonderful about transit forecasting in astrology is that we get timing information. So we know when those periods are going to be intense or acute and when they're going to be over, or when we get a break from that intensity or that acute energy of that transit. And so that's also what I want to emphasize, are those periods of respite, those periods of integration, those periods in which they are getting some sort of relief from that transit, because that satisfies the client to know. And they're like, okay, I'm equipped. Thank you. I got the timing information. I know what to do with it. And I got my good transits too. So that, again, is specifically for transit readings, but the timing information can be really helpful. All right. Do no harm. There's a new astrology ethics organization that's forming right now, and this will probably be one of their tenets. The tenets? 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 We're almost done. Okay, so do no harm. If you don't know, don't pretend to know. So what I mean by that is, be willing to say, I don't know, because that is going to happen in every reading for the rest of your life. Because there are so many techniques and so much history and so many branches and so many orientations and so many ways to read, you're never going to know everything. And so it's really important that you get comfortable with saying, I don't know about that. And then, for some of us, we might want to then go and look it up or get the information and come back to the client, right? And be like, let me look at that. Let me go and explore that. Let me go talk to somebody else about that. Let me go see what I can find out about that. or we can refer out, right? So clients will have questions about things I don't do. And so I'm like, I got a list, I've got a Rolodex of people that I like, that I trust, that I refer out to, and people who refer to me as well. So that comes back to also knowing what not to study, knowing what not to employ, knowing what technique not to add to your toolkit. Because if you're like, you want a horary chart, guess I'll learn horary, you might do some damage. So, have a list of people that you want to refer out when a client has an inquiry that you can't satisfy. And then also, again, just comes to any question. They're like, what do you know about eclipses? You're like, oh, hell, I know. I don't know anything about eclipses, but I'll get back to you. Or, I'm going to then take that on and study like what are eclipses. Yeah, I guess. Okay. All right. Do I have anything else I forgot? Oh, yeah, my resources. All right. So we're just coming to time here. Some of these are first and second year resources that we have for our students, and some of these are not. Donna Cunningham, local astrologer, incredibly prolific writer, was a social worker, astrologer, flower essence practitioner. She wrote several books on counseling for astrologers. Here are two of them. Stephen Forrest, The Inner Sky. What I want to suggest to you about this book is that in the back of the book, there's a checklist. And so if you think you might benefit from a checklist of going through a chart in a structured way, then this might be helpful, The Inner Sky. I also know Demetra George and Douglas Block's Astrology for Yourself workbook. We have that for sale in our store. That workbook is just meant for you to go through your chart, but you might actually find some usefulness in setting up your own checklist by looking at that workbook. Again, that's Demetra George and Douglas Block, Astrology for Yourself. And next, I would recommend, Channy's book or Robert's book, Planets and Transits, or You Were Born for This. They're a little bit different, but they're both cookbook style. So Channy's, it'll say like Moon in Aquarius, Moon in this sign, Mercury in this sign, Mercury in this sign, Jupiter in this sign, Jupiter in this sign. Also, some more detailed information too, like chart ruler, which we all know the chart ruler is the planet that is the ruler of the ascendant, of course, using traditional rulerships. So for Scorpio rising, where is Mars? Where is Mars? Mars is in the ninth, Mars is in the fourth, Mars is in Leo, Mars is in Aquarius. Channy's book kind of has that kind of information too. So it's really great for natal planets. And then Rob Hand's Planets and Transits, another cookbook style, heavy on the psychology piece, but still very helpful. It breaks it down by planet to planet and aspect. So what I mean by that is Uranus sextile moon, Uranus square moon, Uranus trine moon, Uranus opposite moon, Uranus conjunct moon, right? Uranus conjunct Mercury, Uranus sextile Mercury, Uranus trine square Mercury, Uranus trine Mercury, Uranus opposite Mercury, Uranus, like it does that. It's quite a heavy book, but it's a really great resource to look through. And I think there's a new edition coming soon. Sue Tompkins' Aspects in Astrology is great for natal and transits. And the way that she breaks this down, it's cookbook two, but she just does like Moon Mars contacts, Moon Venus contacts, Moon Uranus contacts. And so it really gets to like the core, the heart of what a Moon Uranus is trying to do, what a Moon Venus is trying to do. And so it's helpful for both transits and natal. And then lastly, we have for sale in our school store, either online or in person, we've got these astrology dice. Like I mentioned, that's what I was using when I was at the Portland Art Museum. Our students love these, and there's two reasons why they're helpful. One is that they're actually a divination tool. So if we wanted to ask a question, roll the astrology dice, we can use the language of astrology to get the answer, right? So we've got planets, signs, and houses. So it's like pulling a tarot card or rolling an 8-ball or something like that. But also they're learning tools. So students also buy them so that they can roll the dice and try and put together a sentence. So in the picture that you see here, Mercury and Capricorn in the fourth, they would try and construct a sentence. One of the exercises we do actually is trying to create a person. So kind of doing that clue, that board game, that clue exercise. Who is this person? What are they wearing? And where are they? Right? So just being silly, we might say that this is a very learned student wearing a very respectable three-piece suit, Mercury, Capricorn. And the fourth house, we might say that they are in the homeland of their ancestors. Great. So person, clothes, place. It's like, again, ways in which we can construct sentences based on the Astro Dice. It's a great learning tool and divination tool. All right. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Stormy. I see your text. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's been so fun teaching you again. This is my favorite thing to do in my whole life, is to teach. So I hope you had fun. I certainly did, staring at myself. And you're welcome to visit our website, contact us. Again, our Twitter and Instagram is PDX Astro. Our website is PDX Astro. My website is cosmophilia.com. I'm also an herbalist. Part of my personal magic and personal work lies within both the earth realm and the star realm. So doing herbalism and astrology is what my personal work is. If you're curious about that, you can go to cosmophilia.com. I've been writing a book for 8 years. It's done. It's so big. It's got to get edited, but it'll be out soon, I hope. I just hired someone to run the school for me, so I'm looking forward to turning my attention back to that. But I hope to see you all soon. Keep learning, keep looking at charts, and keep noticing your process. Thank you. Never leave, but we gotta. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot. Thanks for being here. Bye.